that has been our emphasis for the whole year. The current series that we have been dealing with is on the topic of forgiveness. We have already looked at what does it mean to truly forgive, and we started by looking at what it doesn't mean, and then what it does mean. Then another week we talked about where do we get the power to forgive, because it's easy to figure out. If you have been hurt deeply, you probably do not have the power within yourself to forgive. We need a source bigger than ourselves to tap into to be able to truly forgive. Well, today I want to continue with this, and next week we will wrap this all up. But today I want us to continue with, how do I know that I have forgiven someone? Have you ever wondered that? Have I truly forgiven them? Okay, have you ever said that you forgave somebody, and then their name comes up in conversation, and immediately your jaw is tight? Huh? Oh, yes, you do know this. Okay? Hey, you think, yeah, I've forgiven them, and then all of a sudden comes up, and your mind is right there again. Right there. So I think that this is a valid question. How do I know if I have truly forgiven? Well, today I want to take us to a story that I think for most of us we're going to find familiar. Most of us know the stories from Genesis. In fact, if you grew up in Sunday school like I did, I can still picture all of the stories of Genesis in flannel graph. That's right. I saw them so many times over the years that I can still picture. You can show me the flannel graph people and I can tell you who they are, because I know the stories from the flannel graph. Well, we know from the story of Genesis that God calls a man by the name of Abraham. If you've been coming on Sunday nights to our Bible study, we've been doing character studies at people from Genesis. We just finished that up, and we looked at the life of Abraham. We looked at the life of his son Isaac, and we looked at his son Jacob. Now, Jacob is where I want to start today to get to the character that I want to get to. Okay, because Jacob was himself a character. Okay? When we talk about the character of God, that may not be what we're talking about when we start off with Jacob. But Jacob was a character for sure. And Jacob, who was known as the deceiver, meets his own match when he meets his future father-in-law. And he really gets everything that's coming to him. It's one of those things that you're like, justice. This guy has met his match. Because he meets this guy and he sees this beautiful, beautiful girl by the name of Rachel, and he wants to marry Rachel. And so he goes to the father and he says, well, you know what? If you work for me for 7 years, I'll give you my daughter Rachel in marriage. And so for 7 years he works for her father. And then it is time to get married. And they go through the wedding ceremony, and I'm not sure how it all happened back then, but the next day, after the honeymoon, when daylight comes, the veil is gone. He realizes he did not get the beautiful Rachel, but that his father-in-law had tricked him. And he had just married her older, ugly sister. I think we can assume that, at least in Jacob's mind. Oh, so he goes, and you tricked me. He says, you know what, you can marry her, but see, I have to give my oldest daughter first. You can't blame me. Work another 7 years, and I'll give you Rachel. So he promises, they get married right then, but he promises to go ahead and work another 7 years. So for 14 years, he works for the girl of his dream. Pretty incredible, isn't it? Pretty incredible. But here's the thing. Now, he's married. He's married to two women. He's married to Leah, and he's married to Rachel. Well, Rachel can't have children. She's barren. But Leah, she's fertile. And so she begins to have children. And she has Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah. And Rachel is still barren. So she gets the idea, I'm going to give you my servant Bilhah. And through Bilhah, he has Dan and Naphtali. Then Leah thinks that she can't have any more children. And now Rachel has had two children with him through her servant. So she also gets her servant. You thought you had a messed up family. Where was Dr. Phil? So Leah gives him her servant, Zilpah, and he has two more sons, Gad and Asher. Then Leah, and that's a great story right there because Leah wants to spend the night with him and she trades mandrakes so that she can sleep with her own husband. It's just crazy, okay? But she ends up getting pregnant and gives him Issachar, and then she gets pregnant again and gives him Zebulun. And then, after 10 children, Rachel, the love of his life, finally conceives and gives him his 11th son, Joseph. Now later, Rachel will have another son. She will die as she's giving birth to him. She sees him. She names him Benjamin, and she dies. And that's the end of the love of his life. And he has 12 sons. But this 11th son, the son who is of the woman of his dreams, that he has worked for 14 years, Joseph becomes daddy's boy. And he apparently becomes dad's favorite. He's given a coat of many colors, which he seems to like to flaunt. You ever got a gift and you flaunt it in front of somebody who didn't get a gift? No? It happens. Joseph has dreams. In his dreams, he sees his brothers kneeling down before him. And he tells them his dream. He has another dream where he sees even his father and his brothers kneeling down before him. And he tells them. He gladly shares to build himself up. And what happens is that the 10 older brothers hate Joseph. Now, I mean hate. I don't mean that they disliked him. I mean they truly hated him. And I can prove it. Okay, because if you go to Scripture, Jacob sends Joseph to go check on his brothers. They're out in the fields, they're doing the shepherd thing. And he sends them with food and supplies, and he goes to see them. And here's the response of the brothers. Oh, here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him. Now, think about that. Not, here comes the dreamer, let's teach him a lesson. Here comes the dreamer, let's put him in his place. Here comes the dreamer, let's beat him up. The words that come out of their mouth are, here comes the dreamer, let's kill him. older brothers. My older brothers, to me, I know that for my older brothers, I was the pest. Okay? Especially for my older brother, Rob. He's 5 years older than I am. He was always into things that I wanted to be a part of. I was a pest. He got his driver's license, and he hated that he ever had to take us anywhere or do anything. We were in the way. But I don't ever remember my brother saying, "Let's kill him." "Hey, Mark, here comes John. Let's kill him." That's what's going on in this family. So we know that Joseph, he had to be laying all of this on thick. And they hated him for it, to the place that they're ready to kill him. They end up, instead of killing him, they decide to sell him into slavery and fake his death. So they do. They sell him to a convoy going by, and off to Egypt he goes. They kill an animal, put lots of blood on that coat of many colors, and take it back to Jacob. Look what we found. Truly, this must mean that an animal must have devoured your favorite son. How much do you have to dislike your own father that you would lie to him about your brother and say that he's dead? Joseph goes to Egypt. He is sold to a person who is a part of Pharaoh's court, one of the leaders. His name is Potiphar. And Potiphar recognizes that Joseph has leadership skills. This young man. And he places him in charge of his home to take care of everything. At that home is Mrs. Potiphar. Mrs. Potiphar sees Joseph and wants to sleep with him. And so she throws herself at him. And he says, "Nope. I will not sin against my God." She gets mad and says, "Ah! He tried to rape me." Where he is tried, thrown into prison, and forgotten. You would think, while he's working at Potiphar's house, he's probably thinking about, someday I'm going to get even with my brothers. Look what they did to me. But now, he's in jail. He's in prison. And the potential and the time that he has now to think about his brothers, because this all goes back to them. Because if they hadn't have done that, he would not be here. She would not have been able to say that, and he wouldn't be in jail. This all goes back to his brothers. While he's in prison, he gets acquainted with Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, both who have been thrown in prison as well because they upset Pharaoh. And when you're Pharaoh, you can do whatever you want. So they're in jail. They each have dreams. He interprets them dreams, which came to pass. The baker is hanged, and the cupbearer is restored to his position, and Joseph begs him, "Remember me. Get me out of here." The cupbearer forgot him. You know, I think most of us would probably make that same request. You ever made a prayer request like this to God? Get me out of this. This is too much to bear. God, don't forget me. But think of this. See, we can all make that request. But understand that God was not through carrying out the purpose and preparation of Joseph. God is making Joseph into a man of God. He's changing him. He's growing him. And he's not done. So Joseph stays. Even though Joseph begs, don't forget me. Psst, he's forgotten. You know, sometimes life being unfair, life being full of delays, life being full of things where I don't get my way, is often a part of God saying, my child, I'm trying to grow you into a man or woman of God. So for 2 more years, Joseph is in prison. Finally, Pharaoh has a dream. Nobody can interpret it. And there's the cupbearer saying, ding! Hey, I know a guy. Joseph is brought out. He interprets the dream for Pharaoh himself. Even tells him what the dream is. And Joseph is given the opportunity to fix the problem. He tells Pharaoh it's going to be 7 years of famine, or 7 years of great plenty, then followed by 7 years of famine. And what you need to do is you need to find someone to prepare so that during the good years, you're prepared for the lean years. And Pharaoh says, you're the man. And Joseph, in one day, goes from prison to being the second in command in all of Egypt. He only answered to Pharaoh. This could be the moment for Joseph. Because if he ever wanted to go back and find his brothers, he's now a free man. He can do whatever he wants. He's going to have prestige. He's going to have power. And then, before he even gets to do anything, the 7 years of plenty are over. Joseph has stockpiled and stockpiled and stockpiled. And now the years of famine begin. And here they come. Jacob says, we're going to die here in Canaan. You have to go to Egypt and take silver, gold, and buy food that we will not die. And here comes the brothers. He didn't have to go looking for them. They presented themselves to him. It could be his moment of revenge. To make it even sweeter, they don't even know it's him. He had been betrayed by these very men. He had spent the majority of, or all of his adult life, except for the 7 years of feasting, either being a slave or being in prison. That's all he knew. That's all he knew in his adult life. He'd been a slave and he'd been in prison. He has the means. He has the motive. He has the opportunity. He's been dreaming about this moment. He could have had them tortured and killed. But instead, we find one of the most beautiful stories of forgiveness in Scripture. I'm going to read Genesis chapter 45. I want to read the first 15 verses to us. on. This is why preachers mark their page. This is why preachers should mark their page. All right, Genesis 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence!" So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. And I will provide for you here, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. And you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly." Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards, his brothers talked with him. From the way that we look at the life of Joseph, we see how he demonstrated forgiveness to his brothers. There's a few things that I want us to consider this morning in how we can know if we truly have forgiven a person who has hurt us or offended us. The first one is this: you will not be angry with God. Verses 7 and 8 said, "But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler to Egypt." See, instead of being in prison and all of his focus being ugly and nasty and bitterness, which could have been, he could have been oozing bitterness. You don't know what my brothers did to me. Oh, I'm your slave, but you don't understand. I was born free, and my brothers did this to me. I wouldn't even be in prison. Not about her, but I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for my brothers. Joseph had learned that he could trust God with the circumstances of his life. And as a result, he learned the lesson that God specializes in taking what others intended for harm, and he makes it good. He learned that God is more interested in building character into our life than making sure we always get our way and our wants and that we're comfortable and life is how I want it. And sometimes He allows others to do hurtful things in order to work out His purpose in me. See, that's a hard thing to swallow, isn't it? That's hard. We don't want that. I don't want people to hurt me. I don't want people to be mean to me. Everybody should like me. I'm a nice guy. You know, in the middle of all that, we find people, even Christians, who are angry with God. This has happened to me, and I don't like it. And we become angry with God. See, I believe the number one reason is because we see something that God has allowed to enter our life, and it's not consistent with our plan. This isn't what I planned. This isn't what I want. I didn't sign up for this. See, we want it our way. We want to be in control of it. We want to make sure that we're the one. God, you have to do it my way. I have a woman, she's not connected to our church at all, but she calls me all the time for prayer. She's probably, at this point, I would say probably in her 80s. And she calls me, and she says, I need you to pray for me. I'm like, all right. Well, I need you to pray that God will do what I want. That's always her prayer request. Well, I'd like for God to always do what I want to. But God's sovereign. That means God can do whatever He wants. Oh. But I want you to pray. Oh, I'll pray for you. Why don't we pray for God's will to be done? I don't want God's will to be done. She's told me that. I want Him to do what I want Him to do. You thought being a preacher was easy. See, God calls us to trust Him and let those things be. Is it easy? Nope. Hasn't been for me. Probably hasn't been for you. But He wants us to trust Him that His plan for our lives is superior than our plan for our life. Lord, not my will, but thine be done. I don't have to get my way. I don't have to be in control of every situation. You need to be in control. And I will submit to you. See, we may not see it now, but eventually, and for some, I'm convinced we may not even see it on this earth. But no, whether it's on this earth or it's in eternity, that God's perfect plan will be revealed. That His purpose will be revealed. And someday He can show us the why. And say, hey, look at it from where I'm looking at it. And it will all make sense. So the first way we know that we have truly forgiven others is that we're not angry with God. That has nothing to do with the other person, does it? Nothing. Number two, You will not want the other person to fear you. Verses 3 and 4 say, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. And then Joseph said, come close to me. You know, when we're harboring a grudge, we really want the other person to be afraid of us. They want us to fear. They better stay away from me. Why, if they come near to me, they're going to find out the wrath that I got. Oh, they better not bump into me in some dark alley. See, we say all of these things because we want people to fear us. We say things that will intimidate. Somehow that they would be intimidated and come to that same place because we want them to be terrified of who we are, our presence. But forgiveness does not want the offender to be afraid of us. Instead, forgiveness wants the relationship to be restored, if at all possible. 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. How many know that when we're holding a grudge against somebody, that we're wanting them to be punished? We want to see the world fall out for them. We want bad things to happen on them. See, and if somehow we can't physically punish them, then we will try it with fear and intimidation and anything else we can use. But forgiveness trusts God to deal with the justice. You know what we do? We take sides. Hey, did you hear? And we need our story to be told so that we have people on our side. Proverbs 26:20 says this, without wood a fire goes out. Without gossip a quarrel dies down. But do you know when someone hurts us, the first thing we want to do? The third thing, you will not want the other person to feel guilty. Joseph, in verse 5, it says, and now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here. This is Joseph speaking. Don't be distressed. Don't be angry with yourselves, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. When we truly forgive, we will want the offender to be able to forgive themselves for their offense and be able to move beyond that event. Just like we are doing when we turn our lives over to Christ. When we make that choice to forgive. See, often I think we have a hard time forgiving because we're afraid if we forgive, they'll get off the hook. And they deserve for me to be mad. They deserve for me to hate them. They deserve for me to talk about it. When we choose to forgive, we turn the punishment over to God. And one of the evidences that I have trusted God is that my attitude toward the offender will be changed. That doesn't preach well, I know. It's okay. It's still the truth. See, a part of that change is that we will not want that incident to hold them back in life. So, first way, we're not angry with God. Second, we don't have a need for them to fear us. Third, we don't have a need for them to feel guilty. Fourth, how you doing so far? How you doing? These are not easy things. These are not easy things. Number 4, you will not want the person to be humiliated. Verse 1, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there he was. There was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. You know what he did? He did it privately. He let his brothers save face. You know, at this point, Joseph's a pretty popular guy. He said there was going to be 7 years of famine, and guess how many years of famine there was? 7. And you know what he did? He made sure that they had food for the next 7 years. They're now 2 years in, and the plan is working. This guy is a rock star. Okay? He's got this figured out, and he has earned and deserves the respect that people are giving him. Hey, do you know what Joseph's brothers did to him? These people would be willing to string his brothers up. They did that to you? Oh, mighty Joseph? We'll take care of them. They'll never make it to the edge of town. We know a guy. If I've truly forgiven someone who has offended me, I'm going to want to make that a private matter. I don't need to find a way to publicly shout that. Oh, let me just say that so you understand it. I'm just going to find a way to not put that on Facebook. It seems to be our target audience right now. With anything that doesn't go, we just throw it out there for the world to see. But he wants this reconciliation, and he lets it be a private moment where he lets them save face. You will not want the other person to be humiliated. The 5th one, you will want to see the other person blessed. They just keep getting better, don't they? Where's the "Oh, thy hand to be extended"? Oh? Verse 9 says, now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You're going to live here, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that you have. You know what Joseph is wanting to do? He's wanting to bless the very people who sold him into slavery. He wants to bless them. You know, some say, well, you know, he only did that because of his dad and because of his brother Benjamin. That's why he did it. I've heard that argument. Nope. The only reason, he didn't want to bless his brothers. He wanted to bless his dad and his brother Benjamin, so they got the blessing along with them. But flip over to Genesis 50 and see this. Starts in verse 15, and it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? Now think of this. Here's what's happened. They've all moved to Egypt. They're living in the land of Goshen. They are being blessed beyond measure. And their dad dies. And immediately they're thinking, uh-oh. Now is when it happens. I've seen one too many mafia movies. I know this is when it happens. Okay? They're coming for me. Dad's dead. And so they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before you died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. Now we don't know if that was true or not, but that's the story they told. And when their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? There's that fear thing. We want people to fear us. He says, don't be afraid. I'm not God. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them, and he spoke kindly to them. Isn't that a beautiful picture? You know, every now and then we see a picture like that in the news. A couple years ago, there was a young Korean man who graduated from university in Korea. He came to the United States to study at the University of Philadelphia. He was on his way to the post office box. It was just one of those boxes out on the street. He was going to mail a letter. He was stopped by a gang of 11 older teenagers. They were looking for money. There was 11 of them, and they each needed 65 cents for whatever it was. 65 cents. He had no money on him, so they knocked him to the ground and beat him to death. 65 cents times 11. That's the value that they put on this young man's life. Imagine his folks. Their son has gone away to a foreign country for education. They're excited. Only to find out that this gang of teenagers have killed him for $7. That's the value that they put on their son. See, most people would have looked at that situation, and many did, and said, give him the death penalty. On the other side of the world, their parents, this kid's parents, responded in a very unusual way. They wrote a letter to the authorities in Philadelphia everywhere, saying that they were going to give money to establish a fund to be used for the religious, educational, vocational, and social guidance for the young men who took their son's life. They were trying to bless the very people who killed their son. You know, I hear that story and I struggle with that. It's easy to say, oh, that's what we got to do. But for me, I know my kids, David and Claire, Josh, Elijah and Sarah, and I can't even imagine having one of them ripped out of our lives. Can't even imagine that. I can't even imagine coming to the place to say, I forgive. No, that's where we come down to the power, where I know that that couple could not do that. That couple was a Christian couple. See, we can say, oh yeah, we got this. But forgiveness is a tough issue. We do not repay evil with evil, but we overcome evil with good. The last one is we make forgiveness a lifelong commitment. And that's where we're going to finish up next week with this series. You know, there are Bible scholars who take the life of Joseph and they take the life of Jesus, and they've come up with like 152 things where they are similar. Things about their life where Joseph was a type or a foreshadowing of Christ. All the different similarities from their life. And no doubt there are great similarities there. But I think, what does the Bible say about us today? Whoever claims to live in Him must walk as He did. If we claim to be in Christ, then we must walk like Jesus did. We are to forgive just as Christ forgave us. Dave, come. Colossians 3, and I close with this. The Apostle Paul wrote, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." One of the paraphrased editions says this: "So chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe that God has picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Be even tempered, content with second place, quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and as completely as the Master forgave you." You know, sometimes when we talk about forgiveness, I can even tell you when I started to put this all together, I wanted to just do 1 week. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. I was going to talk about forgiveness 1 week. We'll just hit it. We'll have an altar, people come forward. That'll be it. You got one shot. Got to take care of it. I started on this series over a month ago, putting it together. And before I ever wrote the first sermon, I had the outline for all 4 of these messages. Next week's message, the outline is already there. When I started this week, I already had the outline, the scripture, the story that I was going to do. Forgiveness, tough thing. Tough. There are times and there are situations when there may not be reconciliation. It's just a part of life. But we have to do our part. We have to forgive just as we have been forgiven.